Hey guys, welcome to Juicy Tea, where I read out the best stories on Reddit, so you don't have to. The funny, shocking, and satisfyingly juicy. Today's Crazy Karen Tuesday, where we encounter Karens in the wild. Our first story comes from the Entitled People subreddit, posted by Justin Elderberry26. Our neighbours took our fence when we were on a road trip. Well, the title explains most of this, but I'm fuming right now, so gotta rant this one out. We've had issues with our attached neighbours from the moment we bought our house. Originally, it was just a 60-something female and her 18-something grandson. The day we moved in, we tried to make small talk and introduce ourselves. The woman was dropping hints that the old owners used to bake her goodies all the time, and she missed it. Kind of insinuating that we should be like them because she deserved to be treated like a princess. The grandson introduced himself as the worst person in town. What an intro. So afterwards, we just tried to keep a friendly distance and stay out of their way. Suddenly, about a week after living here, they began screaming at odd hours, blasting music and banging on the walls. The police were at their house for domestic disputes monthly due to the woman calling the cops on her grandson. We've lived here for over 2 years now, fixing up our house, making it beautiful, and adding value to it. Up to this point, we've just let them have their problems because it's not like we have kids to worry about protecting. It's just my partner and I, in our mid-20s. Fast forward to last month. One evening, after it got dark, we heard what we thought were gunshots right in our backyard. Mind you, we live in a downtown suburb with an older person facility right behind our house, so we were a little concerned. We have cameras that we installed just to be safe, so we checked them. The grandson and his friends were sitting in their yard talking about shoot another round, they'll just think it's fireworks, and that's a .45 round. Unfortunately, it was dark and we couldn't see them shoot it, but the camera picked up the sound of them shooting off 9 rounds, so we naturally called the cops. The kids then left, and the cops couldn't prove anyone was on the premises with a gun, so they let it go. In the beginning of August, the woman let her daughter, sister-in-law, and their children move in with them for who knows what reason. Before this, they only came to visit during holidays. One time, they left their infant child on the street in a carrier for over half an hour until I knocked and let them know that she was out there. None of my business, but from there on, the screaming and yelling got worse, and this time with crying kids in the mix. I had half a mind to call CPS, but I've heard the awful things that happen to kids in the system, so I couldn't bring myself to do it. This month, we were fortunate enough to go on a road trip to see some cool places and visit family. We left at the end of August and we were checking our cameras when we had service, which was not that much. One day, we got a call from our unattached neighbour saying that our attached neighbours were building a really ugly fence with some spare planks from who knows where. We tried to not worry too much because up until this point, their awful shed wasn't our problem, other than being an eyesore in the neighbourhood. We just enjoyed the rest of our trip and let it go, occasionally checking to make sure they weren't in our yard or anything, since it's nicely fenced in and gated. Didn't catch anything on camera, just them building their shed. We arrived home a few hours ago to find that these entitled Fs had dug out and stolen part of our fence, metal posts and chain link, to create a back fence and a gate for their yard. This left huge holes in our back parking area that my partner almost tripped and fell into. They also tied into our fence incorrectly, pulling our fence lopsided and loose, basically damaging it. Unfortunately, our camera didn't catch them taking our fence, just them in our yard in one frame and in theirs in the next. We want to press charges, but aren't sure about how to go about it. We checked our seller's disclosure stating that the previous owners of our house had put in the fence, so we know it was our fence they took. I am so livid right now, and I know yelling at them won't fix it, but how can you be so entitled that you can't even buy your own chain link fence? Instead, you steal your neighbours when they aren't home. Thanks for reading this rant. Entitled people suck. Posted by RedneckAngel83. Entitled Ken felt entitled to my engagement ring. So, this happened a few months ago. I was doing my normal monthly grocery shopping at Walmart. I was in the meat section, getting what my family needs and will use for the month. I'm terminally ill, so my weight fluctuates quite a bit. My fingers swell and shrink depending on what kind of day I'm having. At this moment, my hands were as small as they ever get. While putting a roast into my cart, my ring slips off and clangs its way through the bottom of the cart and onto the floor, where it bounced a couple of feet. Cue entitled Ken. This man looks directly in my eyes, picks it up and puts it in his pocket. Well, I was shell-shocked and frozen. I mumbled a quiet thanks and, "Can I have my ring back?" He made no move to give my ring back until an employee made it known that she'd seen the whole fiasco happen and would be calling the cops if he didn't hand it over. He mumbled something akin to, "I found it on the ground, it's mine," but he immediately handed it back, despite his protest. Like, what in legitimate hell made him decide that he could just take my ring? Moonlighting 2552 says, "He took finders keepers to a whole new level. It's one thing to find a ring that someone's dropped and didn't realise, as it's extremely unlikely that that person will remember when and where it went missing. It's another to just steal a ring in front of the person who just dropped it." Burnt Bread Dog says, "This happened to me in high school. I took off my rings to wash my hands. I turned to leave without them because I'm absent-minded and forgot. But before I even opened the door, I remembered and turned around, just to see a girl slipping them into her pocket. I asked for my rings back and she goes, 'What rings?' I reached into her pocket and just took them. She goes, 'Whoa, whoa, whoa, those are mine!' I just turned around and said, 'No, they're not,' and left. It was truly bizarre. But I also expect high school girls to be a little bit more entitled than a grown-ass man, like in this." Our next post comes from the MaliciousCompliance subreddit. Posted by Vince003. "Come to my register while speaking on the phone and tell me rudely to stop talking? Alright." Let's say 7 years ago, I used to work as a cashier in a pharmacy. I didn't like the job and had a low threshold when it comes to rude and disrespectful customers. Whenever a customer would come to my register while talking on the phone, I would take great pleasure in saying all the usual stuff that I'm required to say, just loud enough so it disturbs the call. In a super friendly voice, "Hi, how are you? Have you found what you're looking for? Do you want a fidelity card? Would you like to donate to X?" I would usually be met with a halfway gesture or words that meant they want me to stop talking. And stop talking is what I did. In my city, plastic bags can't be given for free. They cost 5 cents, and because they aren't free, I need consent from the client before adding them to the bill. Unfortunately, the bag was the last thing I would have asked for if they let me speak, but I was told to stop talking, so I'd do just that. Scan the items, leave them standing on my counter, don't say the total amount, wait for that customer to realise it's time to pay, let the customer pay, and wait. Usually now, they'd talk to me and ask, "Why aren't you bagging my stuff?" Without a word, I'd point out the clear yellow sign on my counter. Bag, 5 cents. Most of them will pull out their wallets to pay. Some grab their stuff hastily and leave. Still on the phone. Makes me happy. Our last story comes from the PettyRevenge subreddit. Posted by Properly Baked. Scared my neighbour so badly being petty, she called the cops. Again. Years ago, when my wife and I first got married, we moved into a small one-bedroom apartment together. We found this out later, but this particular unit had been vacant for quite a while. The woman on the other side of our only shared wall was an elderly woman. She never spoke to us, but was never overtly rude to us either. Very quickly after moving in, we received a notice that someone had complained about excessive noise. Now, we were young, but we never threw parties at our own house. We just went out. We'd never even had people over at this point, so we were quite confused by this. We called the office and they told us to not worry too much about it. It must have been a misunderstanding. About a week later, we get a knock on the door. It's the police. We open the door to see what's up. They tell us a neighbour has called and complained that we're being too loud. We were literally sitting in their living room watching TV. We showed the officers as much and they apologised and left. This happened several more times over the next few months. One time, we came home from a movie to find the cops knocking. We showed them our ticket stubs and opened the door to a dark and silent apartment. At this point, the officer said, "Okay, we'll take care of this." I closed the door but stayed close and watched them walk towards my neighbour and knock on her door. I hear them telling her she has to stop calling them for nothing or there'll be consequences. After seeing this, we now knew for sure who was calling. A few days later, we were parking and saw her pull in right after us. My wife decided to try and talk to her finally and see if we could figure out the problem. My wife walked to her car, smiling and saying hello. This woman locked herself in the car and started crying. We left her alone, obviously. My wife went straight to the office to speak to staff about this issue. I went inside and waited at the peephole. Now, this woman was very old and walked with a walker. I heard the outside door close and waited a few seconds. She came into the view of my peephole. While she's walking by my door, I reach back and kick the door with all my might. She screams, lifting her walker into the air as she nearly sprints to her apartment. A few minutes later, I get out my vacuum and start running it as a cover because I know what's coming. A few minutes later, sure enough, the police are at my door. Lucky for me, it's the same cops as last time. They knock a couple times and I shut off the vacuum and answer the door. They apologise for the intrusion, but they have to ask, did I strike my door while she was walking by? I was shocked at the accusation. I say, come on guys, I would never. What kind of childish monster would do that to an old woman? I don't know if they believed me or not, but they accepted my explanation. After this final straw, she was not allowed to renew her lease a few months later and was cited for improper use of 911. We were also granted an order of protection against her. Was I an a-hole and super petty? Definitely. Do I regret it? Sometimes. Would I do it again? Abso-effing-lutely. While I definitely don't condone scaring old ladies, I'm guessing she was making all these complaints, trying to get you guys booted from the apartment so she could go back to having the place all to herself. Didn't see that owner reverse coming. Remember, I post new content every day, so subscribe for more juicy tea.